or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Representing the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, the Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Azouz Nasri, will participate as of tomorrow in Doha in the second World Summit on Social Development. And President Abdelmajid Tebboune has ordered close monitoring of the electricity interconnection project between the north and south of the country and entrusted that surplus electricity production be directed towards exportation to Europe or Africa. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, has stressed that the fundamentals of the Western Sahara issue are preserved in the UN Security Council Resolution 2997, highlighting that the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination has been decoupled from the autonomy plan and must be exercised in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. And Pope Leo XIV has once again condemned the violence committed by the Rapid Support Forces against defenseless populations in the region of Al Fasher in Sudan. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. I'm Asia Abukar. Good afternoon. The President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, has received messages of congratulations from several heads of state and government, kings, princes and government officials on the occasion of the 71st anniversary of the outbreak of the November 1st revolution. The President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, has received congratulatory messages from the President of China, Xi Jinping, His Majesty the Sultan of Oman, Haytham bin Tariq, the President of Western Sahara, Ibrahim Ghali, the President of the State of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, the King of Bahrain, Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, the President of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, the King of Jordan, Abdullah II, and the co-presidents of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. Now, the President of the Republic has chaired a meeting of the Council of Ministers dedicated to a draft law establishing the general rules relating to trust services for electronic transactions and electronic identification. Mariam Barshi reports.
Following the presentation of the Prime Minister on the government's activities over the past 2 weeks, the President of the Republic commended the content of the Highway Code, which provides for rigorous measures capable of reducing road accidents, especially since it takes into account all elements of the traffic regulation and control chain. He then instructed the government to facilitate the work of the judiciary and law enforcement bodies, enabling them to initiate and take appropriate legal action, inspect vehicles and investigate road accidents. He also tasked law enforcement bodies with providing the security forces with technological equipment, enabling electronic payment of fines, drug testing and means of controlling loaded weight at security checkpoints. Regarding the presentation on connecting major agricultural projects involving strategic crops to the electricity grid, the President ordered close monitoring of the electricity interconnection project between the north and south of the country and instructed that surplus electricity production be directed towards exportation to Europe or Africa.
Regarding the agricultural development plan, the President instructed the Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development and Fisheries to coordinate with the Minister of Foreign Trade and Export Promotion to immediately proceed with the importation of combined harvesting and seeding equipment. Meanwhile, the Council of Ministers also approved the draft law establishing the general rules relating to trust services for electronic transactions and electronic identification, as well as a presidential draft decree ratifying the headquarters agreement reached between Algeria and the World Intellectual Property Organization concerning the opening of the WIPO external office in Algeria. Now, representing the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, the Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Nasri Azouz, will participate as of tomorrow in Doha, Qatar, in the second World Summit on Social Development, which will last until the 6th of this month. The World Summit on Social Development is being held in accordance with the UN General Assembly resolutions and aims to address shortcomings and renew commitment to the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and its program of action and its implementation, and provide the necessary impetus for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Now, the Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, has stressed that the fundamentals of the Western Sahara issue are preserved in the UN Security Council Resolution 2997, highlighting that Sahrawi people's right to self-determination has been decoupled from the autonomy plan and must be exercised in line with the international law and the UN Charter. In an interview with the international channel Al-24 News, Mr. Attaf stressed that the Kingdom of Morocco wanted this time during last Friday's session to take advantage of the occasion to try to impose its will on the issue of Western Sahara in order to advance its well-known historical objectives.
Et cette année, la particularité a été que cette occasion du renouvellement.
This year, the singularity was that the Kingdom of Morocco sought to seize the opportunity presented by the renewal of the United Nations mission in Western Sahara to force through an unprecedented change. Morocco's aim was to push through three ideas that are particularly important to it. The first was the dismantling of MINURSO, or the radical transformation of its mandate. Secondly, to impose the autonomy plan as the sole and exclusive solution to the Western Sahara issue, and to kill off once and for all the idea of a referendum on self-determination. This, in fact, was the reason behind the particular enthusiasm we saw this year around the issue of Western Sahara.
Autour de la question du Sahara occidental.
Regarding the situation following the adoption of the resolution, the Minister of State specified that the UN mission MINURSO has not been dissolved or dismantled and that its mandate has not been changed. On the contrary, the term was extended to 1 year, which constitutes a normal renewal, as has always been the case.
Aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Le principe que le Maroc...
What is happening today? Firstly, the principle that Morocco has desperately tried to enshrine that of its sovereignty over Western Sahara has been removed. The text has been expunged of the two references to this principle in the operative part of the draft resolution. This reference remains in the preamble. It remains in the preamble with less legal force. But in the resolution, there is absolutely no reference whatsoever to the Moroccan state or to the sovereignty of the Moroccan state over Western Sahara. Secondly, the autonomy plan is no longer the exclusive framework for resolving the issue. The resolution has opened the door to other ideas, to other alternative plans, which is very, very important. The right to self-determination has been decoupled from the autonomy plan. It must be exercised in accordance with the international law and the United Nations Charter. The fourth very important point is that MINURSO, which Morocco wanted to either dismantle or radically transform in terms of its mandate, has had its mandate extended for 1 year.
A vu son mandat précisément prorogé d'une année.
The Algerian diplomacy chief stated that thanks to the efforts of Algeria and other countries, new amendments were introduced to the draft resolution in order to preserve the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter.
Ce projet de résolution était tellement déséquilibré.
This draft resolution was so imbalanced, so biased, that it reflected only one side's position. It was so outrageous that in the end, 8 countries, more than half of the Security Council members, introduced amendments. It was not just Algeria. And our amendments all had 3 objectives. First, the autonomy plan cannot in any way be the exclusive and sole framework for seeking a political settlement to the Western Sahara issue. Second, the right to self-determination of the Sahrawi people must be exercised in accordance with international law, the Charter of the United Nations and Resolution 1514, and not be conditional on the content of the Moroccan autonomy plan. And thirdly, MINURSO must be extended to fulfill its mission of organizing the referendum. All these combined efforts resulted in the introduction of a new balance in the draft resolution that was finally put to the vote in the Security Council.
Finalement soumis au vote du Conseil de sécurité.
Meanwhile, Mr. Attaf regretted the later decisions taken by the French National Assembly on the 1968 agreement, stating that this is an internal French matter.
C'est attristant de voir un pays aussi grand que la France de faire...
It is sad to see a country as large as France making of the history of another independent sovereign country the subject of an election campaign. This is a matter between the French National Assembly and the French government. It is an internal matter. It does not concern us at the moment. It could concern us if it becomes a matter between governments, because the 1968 agreement is an intergovernmental agreement. It is an international agreement, and the French government has not told us anything about it. And so, on substance, we are not reacting. The French media and even some of the French political class have a very biased, very one-sided view of this 1968 agreement. The 1968 agreement was never a liberal agreement designed to encourage immigration. On the contrary, it established restrictions on the existing regime, which was liberal in terms of immigration, established by the Evian agreements. So it is an agreement that is by its very nature historically restrictive.
Donc c'est un accord par nature historiquement restrictif.
The Algerian diplomacy chief concluded by stating that the resolution issued by the Security Council mentions twice in its practical clauses the right of the Sahrawi people to decide their destiny without linking it to autonomy in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. Now, the Minister of Hydrocarbons and Mines, Mohamed Arkab, will participate as of tomorrow in Brazzaville, Congo, in the 48th session of the Ministerial Council of the Organization of African Petroleum Producers. Mariam Barshi tells us more.
This meeting will be marked by the participation of the CEO of the Sonatrach Group, Nordin Daoudi, and the President of the Hydrocarbons Regulatory Authority, Emin Remini, alongside the Ministers of Oil and Energy of the member countries, as well as representatives of regional and international financial and energy institutions. This Council, the highest decision-making body of the organization, will address several strategic issues concerning the future of the oil and gas industry in Africa, in addition to evaluating the organization's activities for the year 2025 and examining the work plan and budget for the year 2026, focused on strengthening technical cooperation, the development of local content, and support for the creation of the African Energy Bank as a financing mechanism for energy infrastructure projects on the continent. The agenda also includes the examining of the organization's institutional reform project, the updating of its vision and long-term strategy, as well as the adoption of the report relating to the appointment of the new Secretary General and the election of the chairmanship of the Council and executive bodies for the next period.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and Algeria and 7 other OPEC Plus countries have decided to implement a production adjustment of 137,000 barrels per day from the 1.65 million barrels per day additional voluntary adjustments announced in April 2023. Mariam Barshi.
This adjustment will be implemented in December 2025. Beyond December, due to seasonality, the 8 countries also decided to pause the production increments in January, February and March 2026, as detailed in the table below. The 8 participating countries reiterated that the 1.65 million barrels per day may be returned in part or in full subject to evolving market conditions and in a gradual manner. The countries will continue to closely monitor and assess market conditions, and in their continuous efforts to support market stability, they reaffirm the importance of adopting a cautious approach and retaining full flexibility to continue posing or reverse the additional voluntary production adjustments, including the previously implemented voluntary adjustments of the 2.2 million barrels per day announced in November 2023. The 8 OPEC Plus countries also noted that this measure will provide an opportunity for the participating countries to accelerate their compensation. The 8 countries reiterated their collective commitment to achieving full conformity with the Declaration of Cooperation, including the additional voluntary production adjustments that will be monitored by the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee. They also confirmed their intention to fully compensate for any overproduced volume since January 2024. The 8 OPEC Plus countries will hold monthly meetings to review market conditions, conformity and compensation.
To the Middle East now, UNICEF has affirmed that despite the ceasefire enforced in Gaza for 22 days now, more than 20 million children are still in need of food and water. In a statement to the press, the UNICEF spokesperson, Tassin Graham, pointed out that the infrastructure that used to supply water and provide medical care to children did no longer exist on account of 2 years of Israeli acts of aggression. The UN agency, which noted that 650,000 children were still waiting to resume school, underlined that aid remained insufficient, although their number was still beyond the levels observed before the Israeli aggression. In this connection, UNRWA assured that the Israeli occupying authorities were still undermining the entry of aid into Gaza and preventing its personnel's access to the enclave. It affirmed that the access to the occupied Palestinian territories had been banned to all agencies' international personnel, and all its operations stopped since last year. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and the 9th European Forum of Left-Wing, Green and Progressive Forces meeting in Vienna has highlighted the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination and independence and reiterated its support to the Sahrawi issue. In a final declaration issued at the end of a 3-day meeting, it stressed that the Western Sahara issue remains a question of decolonization and reiterated the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. In this respect, the European Forum stressed the necessity to allow the Sahrawi people to exercise its right through a free, fair and democratic referendum. It also stressed during its assessment of the trade agreement recently concluded between the European Union and Morocco was illegal, denouncing the agreement as an attempt to bypass the rulings issued by the European Court of Justice. The European Forums came in the wake of the adoption by the UN Security Council of Resolution 2797, which notably provides for a 1-year extension of the UN mission for the organization of a self-determination referendum in Western Sahara. In this connection, the Sahrawi Observatory for Natural Resources and Environmental Protection urged the UN and its member states to reaffirm the central character of the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination as the only legal and legitimate framework. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International and to Sudan. And now the International Organization for Migration has said that some 71,000 people have been displaced in Al Fasher and surrounding villages a week after the rapid support paramilitary forces took control of the capital of North Darfur State in Western Sudan. According to the International Organization for Migration, teams on the ground estimate that between November 1st and 2nd, approximately 8,600 people were displaced due to clashes in the city. The organization said that the insecurity on the roads is likely to limit movement while the situation remains tense and unstable. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV has once again condemned the violence committed by the rapid support forces against defenseless populations in the region of Al Fasher, capital of North Darfur State in Western Sudan. The Pope stressed that the indiscriminate violence perpetrated against women and children, the attacks on defenseless civilians, and the serious obstacles to humanitarian action are inflicting unacceptable suffering on a population already exhausted by long months of conflict. Since April 22, 2023, the conflict between the army and the RSF in Sudan has left tens of thousands dead, millions displaced, and caused the worst humanitarian crisis currently underway. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. That's it for our news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to the international event of the week.
The international event of the week.
US President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping met this week in Busan, South Korea, with the objective of addressing such thorny issues as trade tariffs and rare earths. In statements made after their face-to-face meeting, the first in 6 years, the American president announced that tariffs on Chinese imports would be cut to 47% from 57% and decrease its tariffs on fentanyl from 20% to 10%. According to Chinese media, the US agreed to suspend restrictions it had imposed on foreign firms, which had hit Chinese companies. China in return committed to resuming massive purchases of soybeans. a key issue for the US, considered the world's first soybeans exporting country. Asked on whether settling the issue was crucial for the American president, as the soybean exports represent 0.6% of the country's GDP. But not only, it raises the concerns of the US farmers, a major component of President Trump's MAGA base. Our political analyst Hamid Salhi has this to say.
Part of what we have been seeing and read about this meeting is, number one, it is about strategy and leverage more than anything else. Both countries have tried to diversify their economies by looking at other markets. China by expanding its trade relation with as many countries in the world as it can. Just as an example, China has 70% more trading partners than the US. In turn, the United States looked to reduce its dependency on China by looking to be self-sufficient. Second, what prompted this meeting, which lasted 2 hours after 2 years of no meeting between the two leaders, and after 6 months of tariff escalation, after all of this, they came to the realization that the escalation of tariffs was not effective. It leads nowhere. And at one point, both parties will say, so what? Where are we going to do? In both the soybeans and rare earth materials, the Chinese came on top. They played their card very well. In retaliation to the United States move, they cut off their import from the U.S. by 20%, knowing only too well that the farmers in the red states that the Republican control, will be most affected. So they look for ways to reduce President Donald Trump political support, hitting him at his base. And with the midterm legislative elections on the horizon, the American president thought best to reduce his losses and thereby appears or showcase himself as undermining China's leverage. Conversely, this will give President Trump a way to tell his base that he got their back and he got them a win. In this case, local politics determined the yes move, but it remains to be seen whether this be enough come election time.
China agreed to suspend for 1 year its export controls on rare earths and semiconductors, which play a vital role in new technologies, or in cars, planes, or weapons manufacture. The move will help ease a supply chain disruption risk. The 1 year suspension agreed to by China is seen as a breakthrough and a step forward towards a more balanced relation between the US and China, which controlled 70% of rare earth mining and 90% of the material processing. It is worth noting that the US reached a deal last month with Australia to boost supplies of rare earth and other critical minerals, with the aim to countering China's dominance of the market. Asked if China would keep the rare earths potential as its main source of leverage in its trade war with the United States, our political analyst Hamid Salhi commented the issue.
Again, this is about long-term strategy and gaining leverage. The United States strategy to use tariff as a means to win strategic points or leverage with China appears to backfire with the issue of rare earth material the same way it did with soybeans. In this sense, what the Chinese are telling the Americans, we are going to give you a year to sort this out. The United States has indeed looked for other partners, but the cost is too high, as in the case of the $20 billion deal with the Argentinians, or as in the case of putting pressure on the Ukraine to pay back for the U.S. military support they provided them. And in exchange, they ask them for territories filled with this material. But with the Ukraine proposal failing, as we know, the Ukrainian rejected that proposal, and the Argentinians deal too expensive, and other countries also did not give the United States a way to be self-sufficient or not relying that much on the Chinese. Given all of that, the United States thought best to turn inward, looking at its own domestic economy and start building this industry. But that too, are we finding out, is time-consuming. It will take at least a decade for the United States to achieve self-sufficiency. As such, China made the best move. It gave the United States a year long, as a well-known specialist noted. The Chinese will come back in a year and either impose more conditions than the American or get out of the deal altogether. Again, what we've seen is a poor strategy move on the part of the United States. And the Chinese appear to be having the leverage they need. So in both agreements, the Chinese have done well serving their national interest. For the rare earth materials and soybean, it would make sense for the United States to revise its tariff escalation and work on the Chinese on reaching a solution or resolution that will best serve both countries.
The meeting held this week between US President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping resulted in binding commitments, but not in an agreement that could help settle all outstanding issues and ease tension between the two rivals. Although President Trump assured that a US-China trade deal would be signed soon, uncertainty remains as to how the relations between the two powers will evolve in the future.
And that was the international event of the week devoted to the China-US file, with which we come to the end of today's English edition. We'll meet you again tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Algiers time for a fresh news edition. Goodbye.
Hello and welcome to our weekly program devoted to Algerian economic news. First in the news.
مع إذاعة الجزائر الدولية لن تفوتكم لحظة واحدة من الأخبار السياسية والاقتصادية الهامة. إذاعة الجزائر الدولية، صوتنا في العالم.
تزامنا وفعاليات الصالون الدولي للكتاب بالجزائر.